Michael, right before the break, we were kind of talking about, the blackouts and sort of the reserve that you guys have to monitor and keep. And during the break, I had asked you, well, when people come home from work, can you actually see a spike? As people come home, start cooking dinner, or maybe turn their heat or their AC on. Right. And you said, yeah, you can actually visualize that. And you showed me some charts that reflect that. Where is that all taking place? Is there like a massive control room where some engineers or something are monitoring all of this?
Yeah, there actually is. It's a big room in Vancouver in what we call an undisclosed location because it's really critical to maintaining the reliability of the power system, and lots of big screens on the wall, a whole schematic of the power system with every substation on it. So the substations here in the gorge are on there. And we call them dispatchers, can see at any one time what the power system is doing. They also see a real-time display of how much power is being generated and how much power is being used. There's also a control center that manages the output of the hydro system, which is a similar operation, and they're paying attention to what's actually being generated for the most part and trying to anticipate what people are going to do. Say if it's a really hot day, or people going to crank up the air conditioning more, and we have all sorts of folks that actually watch that and are looking out a day ahead, a week ahead, even a month ahead, and sort of looking at long-term weather forecasts and many other sort of predictors of what power demand is going to do. And we want to make sure that we always are going to have the power on hand to supply that demand. So if, for instance, it's a low water year and we're not sure that the hydro system is going to be able to generate enough, we may go out on the market and try to buy some additional power to make sure we have enough of a cushion.
Okay. What if you're off on that estimate or that forecast, and how much time do you have to react if you weren't able to be terribly proactive about it?
We have a few seconds, essentially, and that's why we have to have some of our power generating capacity, some of the turbines, and it's generally at the dams, have to be not running but ready to run at a moment's notice so that they can rapidly come on. Now, a new variable that's added to the mix is wind generation, because traditionally you could match power demand with power generation pretty predictably. You could ramp up generation at the dams or at other power plants. You kind of knew how much people were going to use over the course of the day, and you could adjust accordingly. Well, now we have a new form of generation in the system that is actually not running on our schedule. It's running on the schedule of the weather and the wind, and so we have to be ready to accommodate that extra generation should the wind pick up suddenly. And generally what we do is then ramp down the generation in the hydro system, and that holds more water back, which can potentially be used later on if the wind stops blowing. So in that way, hydro and wind are very complementary power sources.
Right. And I really want to focus on wind here in just a second, but before we do that, with the hydro, like for this year, the Columbia was very high. I mean, we had the banks flooding out, and so it seems like, from somebody who knows nothing, every dam that I drove by was passing a lot of water.
Right.
So I would assume that's generating
a lot of power. Right. Now,
what if the wind's powering a lot too at that point?
Right. So that's a very astute question. The water you see sort of thundering through the spillways at the dams is spill. So that's actually not generating power. That's going through the spillways as opposed to the turbines. But this spring, you're right, virtually all the turbines that are online and can operate have been operating. So for most of this spring, the hydro system's been running full bore. And then there's so much water in the river that in addition to that, some water has to go over the spillways. Now, spill is also very good for fish. It helps the juvenile fish come down the river. So as a matter of course, we always spill. You'll always see some spill in the spring and through the summer to help fish go down the river. But we encountered a very a sort of unusual situation this spring because there was so much water in the river. And then when the wind picked up as well, there were some times, often in the middle of the night when people are using less power, that we actually had an oversupply of electricity.
Oh.
So think about that for a minute. An oversupply of electricity, not just electricity, but also renewable electricity. So we're sort of in an envious position because we are running almost entirely now off renewable power and even have too much of it at times. So we were actually sending quite a bit of that to California, but there were a few times when we had to actually direct the wind producers to turn down their generation because we didn't have that option in the hydro system. When the water is really high, we can't turn the generation down as easily because it could send too much water through the spillways, and that creates a dissolved gas in the river, which can be harmful to fish.
Wow.
So it's a really delicate sort of balancing act, and they're trying to manage all these different sources at one time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's go ahead then and talk specifically about wind. And obviously the gorge is known for its wind, so it would seem like a likely place from that standpoint.
Sure.
But then it's also known for, and almost probably more known for, its scenic beauty. I mean, we're nationally protected. It's a scenic area. That's got to be quite the balance too, because these things are not small. They're quite visible, and they really have changed the eastern landscape of the Columbia Gorge.
Right.
For somebody who sees them as a con, explain what some of the cons are and what some of the pros are.
Well, and just one caveat here, which is BPA is not the one actually constructing the wind projects. Those
Important
are
point.
generally private companies that are developing them and are connecting them to BPA systems. So we handle the power output from them, and we help integrate that into the power system, but we don't actually manage the projects themselves. I think, in general, I think that in BPA fields, they're a really important addition to the power system. They're another form of renewable power. They produce economic benefit to the region as well. We don't have a direct authority over siting them, although we do examine the environmental impacts of connecting them to our system. One of the places that we've encountered the scenic issue is we have actually are building some new transmission lines to handle the wind power, essentially, particularly out to the east of the Dalles. As you really get into the main wind corridor, the pipes are getting full. There's so much wind power when it's all generating that the grid needs more capacity to handle that power.
Okay.
So we're building those lines, and we've also proposed a new line here kind of on the eastern end of the gorge, and that's created some consternation by folks that are concerned about the scenic impact. So it's a delicate line to walk. People generally favor renewable power, and certainly that's a good thing. The more we can produce our own power locally, the better off we're going to be. But at the same time, we don't want to do it at the expense of all the other resources that we value.
Exactly. Well, good. When we come back, let's talk a little bit more about wind and also just some of the misperceptions that people have about BPA and what you guys do. I mean, you brought up a very good point. You're not necessarily constructing, these wind towers that we're seeing, and you probably kind of get the blame for it more often than not. So we'll discuss some of those things and understand a little bit more about the BPA when we come back. Be right back.
Coming up.
However, traditionally, and there certainly is a lot of the year when California, other parts of the region need power, and we can sell some of the additional power that we have beyond the needs of the Northwest